Hello friends, welcome. Friends, those who are following the telecom sector might have seen this PIB release. It was on 2nd of September 2024. So what it says, DOT notifies telecommunication digital administration of Digital Bharat Nidhi rules of 2024. So basically what it means and what I'm trying to do in this video. So let's understand that. Now, Digital Bharat Nidhi is a reincarnation of the word USO, which is Universal Service Obligation Fund, right? So that's the word Digital Bharat Nidhi. Now, the USO has been under function for a long period of time. So I think the first act was released on 2004, first of sorry 12th of January 2004. So I'm going to take you through some of the documents here which I have listed down in my folder. So I'll describe to you what changes actually happened. Now what I am going to do in this video is to explain to you what was the need for this Digital Bharat Nidhi rules, why it has been announced, and what purpose it is going to accomplish, which was not possible earlier. So that's the whole purpose of this video, and it is as simple as that. And let's go step by step, and you will be able to understand how this whole thing transformed from the beginning and where we are today. Now friends, in order to understand this, we need to first reconcile with the fact that when the telecommunication sector was opened up, we found that most of the activity which was anchored by the telecom service provider happened in the urban areas, because the business proposition potential is more in the urban areas and not in the rural areas. So what the DOT decided was to collect a revenue share to the tune of 5% from the telecom service providers in terms of license fee, to able to fund telecom activities or do market development in areas where the operators were hesitant to go, which is typically the rural and underserved areas. That's the whole purpose of the original USO fund. And this USO fund is not a new concept. This concept is prevalent worldwide. Anywhere you go, whether it is US or any European countries, the USO fund is a well set out concept which is used to fund development activity under the banner of telecommunication in the rural and underserved areas. So India also did the same thing. Now when the fund was announced, since the fund was collected from the telecom service providers, which are basically indulge in activities of rolling out telecom services in the country and contributing towards the USO fund. So what happened was that when the fund was initially conceived, all the development work which was supposed to take place in the rural areas were funded to the telecom service providers, so that they get the viability gap on the funding of the activities which they do in the rural areas, because normally they were not going. So they were funded through a mechanism under the USO fund so that they can go and roll out services in the rural areas. And the whole thing was undertaken under the bidding scheme. So it was set by bidding. So that was the initial concept of the USO fund. Nothing was given without bidding, right? Because bidding was important, because whenever somebody is funding, when the government is funding for activities in the rural areas, it was ensured that the funds are properly spent, and the bidding was the foundation on which the spending of the fund was established, and the funds were given only to the service provider. So that was the initial structure of the funding, and let me explain to you by going through some of the documents which will help us to take this discussion forward. So if you look at the act, So let me take you through the act, and I'll open this document, the act, and then I'll draw this, and you'll see that, let's look at this. So what it is saying, fund means universal for obligation fund established under this, and the universal for obligation fund means obligation to provide access of basic telegraph services to people in the rural and the remote areas at affordable and reasonable price. And this is on 9th of January 2004. So let's understand this. This is very, very crucial so that you can understand what happened now and how that funds have been transformed. So this is the first document, and then let's go to the next document in the series. Then came the rules. So let me just close this document, and let's open the rules, which is on the same year 2004. Let's look at this rules. So what I will show you here is that what these rules are basically talking about. So this rules talks about the various kinds of obligations which the funds will be able to administer. Means the administration of USO obligation fund, like you see, to formulate. So the administrator shall have the powers to formulate bidding procedure, including the terms and conditions for the purpose of implementing universal obligations. So bidding procedure is very important. This is a very, very crucial thing which people might have not focused on when they were looking at the current Digital Bharat Nidhi rules. So this was very, very important, and everything was done through a bidding process. There were hardly any exception in the beginning, right? And now let's look at the next thing. So here what they've done was they identified those areas under which the funds would have got disbursed. So there were very, very clear identification which was done, stream 1, stream 2. So you'll find that all these things are mentioned. So I don't want to get into this detail because these are all provided under the fund. So these were the things, and there was one more item in this document, which is 26th March 2004, which is that there was an exception, and which is very important to understand. I told you everything was through bid, but there was an exception. The exception was for household direct exchange line connections. Now, if you recall the word RDELs, the RDEL was given based on a fixed cost to the service providers, and many people got this funding of RDEL, and those RDELs actually created some kind of a difficult situation for the government, because there were certain amount of I would say mispractices which were done by the operators, resulting in spending of this fund but not getting the kind of services which were required. And I will not use the word that fraud, but actually there were certain kind of activities which happened under the this particular exception. That's why bidding was very, very important, and it was a very nasty experience for the government, right? So let's go to the next document. So the next document, again, let me just close this, and I'll go to the next document here. So let's go to the 2006 document. And if you look at the 2006 document, in this document, if I see, there was one important thing, that initially it was felt that everything which is under the banner of basic is where the support was required. Mobile communication was not supported. And later what they did was they removed the word basic, which means that mobile connectivity fell now under the banner of basic, right? Which is important. This is on 2006-11, that is 17th November 2006. Now if I go further in this, so let me just close this. And if I go further in this series of documents, let's see what is the next document talking about. So the next document, if you see here, so what is that? So here what happened was the fund was expanded to include the infrastructure providers as well as the internet service provider. Earlier only the cellular operators and the universal access service licenses were allowed. So because this is the bone of contention, who is contributing to the fund? That's very important. Yes, ISPs are contributing to the fund. Infrastructure provider may not be contributing to the fund, but they were allowed to take the subsidies, because the operators continuously keep on complaining that look, we contribute to the fund of 5% and you are giving the subsidy to others who have made no contribution. So this is a lot of, you can say, some kind of unhappiness that the operators have. So that you should understand, and that is why it is important to look into the history to see how the fund had evolved. Now, if you look at this document, what happened in this document, which is 17th March 17 March 2012, the National Fiber Optical. If you recall, there was Narendra Modi government came and he launched National Optical Fiber Network scheme, right, in 2014. Actually, the scheme was laid, the foundation was laid by the Congress government in 17th March 2012 by including this provision into the USO fund. You can clearly see here, right, which I have marked here, right. So that was also got included, and the funding was done through the USO fund for the optical fiber rollout scheme. So let me just close this also, and let's go to the next document. So now in this document, if you see, there is nothing much to discuss. So I'll just close this, and then I go to the next document. And here what happened was, so now there were certain more inclusions which actually happened. So I will not go into each and every detail. I'll go to the key document of first, because what happened was, as you progress, new schemes, new items got added on. These were added on a incremental and ad hoc basis. You will find satellite connectivity and various things got added here. So I'll go straight to this particular year, which is 1st June 2017. So if I open this, you will find a new interesting inclusion which happened, which was never done earlier. What was that? This is basically let me give you this, let me just go to the page directly first. So if I go to this page, you'll find that in this page, what this page talks about. This talks about the inclusion of consultancy services, consultancy assistant and advisory support. This was not part of the fund earlier, so this provision was also included in 1st June 2017, right? So this was also included, and then there was an interesting thing which happened in this, what was the date? 8th December 2022, 8 December. So if I open this, you will find that this is a completely new thing, and you will be surprised that what the government did was they included R&D funding also in this fund, which was not part of that. It says that financial support not exceeding 5% of the annual collection of the fund may be provided to the approval of the central government for research and development and product and services for the purpose of providing affordable telegraph in the rural and remote areas subject to condition, blah, 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 right? So this was not there. The R&D part was not there in the fund. This was included here, right? And then, so here it also basically, one more thing happened here, which is very, very important. Look at the word special criteria for selecting universal service obligation provided by nomination. This also got included in this fund, which was not. And if you look at here, what happened in this, that special circumstances or exchange for adequate justification be recorded in writing. It is important. It has to be recorded in writing. It was not. So this was not a bidding process. It has to be recorded in writing. So this is a very important point to be noted. Happened in 8 December 2022. Yeah. So then after that, the new act which came out, and the act was notified. So let me just go to the act. So there was one more rule. Let me just go through that rule also and see what was there in this rule. Oh, this is nothing. You just leave it aside. So I have already discussed that. And now let's talk about the new rules. See, in this new rules, what happened was, so if I go to here, you will find that, no, this is the act. This is the act. So before I go to the rule, let's talk about the act. The act, the Telecommunication, this is Telecommunication Act, clause number 25. Here, this act, so before I go to this to clause number 25, let's talk about chapter 5. Chapter 5 of the Indian Telecommunication Act included a section called Digital Bharat Nidhi. Now, the Telecom Act was notified on 24 December 2023. So here, clearly, the Universal Obligation Fund was created under the Indian Telegraph Act earlier. Now it will be called a Digital Bharat Nidhi, and sum of money received toward Digital Bharat Nidhi under Section 24 shall be credited to the Consolidated Fund of India for government for the following objective. Now the objective of the USO, as I told you, kept on changing over the period with those various notifications. Now what this act did, they laid out the objective very clearly. So let's look at the objective, because in order to understand the rules, you need to understand the objective. So what this objective is doing, it is saying support of universal services through promoting and delivery of telecommunication services in rural, remote and urban area. Urban area was not part of the USO earlier. So urban area got included here, which was not. Then, as I told you, the R&D was included, but there was a lot of constraint put on the R&D. It has to be 5% and all those things which you saw there. Here, it is very clearly placed, no condition imposed. It clearly says research and development for telecommunication services, technology and product clearly supported, and there is no conditions which have been imposed on it. Support of pilot project, consultancy assistance, advisory support toward provision of services under the clause A of the section of this act, support of introduction of telecommunication services, technologies and product. And Digital Bharat Nidhi shall be administered in a manner that can be prescribed. So what do you see here? You saw here that everything which happened during the period, during this 2004 till 2024, with various amendment in the act, has now been incorporated in the Telecommunication Act with full flexibility. And then what they did was, in the same thing, if you look here, there is a regulatory sandbox which also got created, where all these pilot projects can be tested. So there is another thing which actually got created under the Act, which is Chapter 6, which says Innovation and Technology Development. So there are two things, two clauses, clause number 24 and clause number 27, which kind of anchors these two things together. So whatever projects which will be rolled out under the Digital Bharat Nidhi Act can be also anchored under this clause 27, which is innovation and technology development, right? So this is how it is. You need to see that. Now let's go to the rules. After having gone through these details, now let's go to the rules. Now what this rules does is, the rules lays out clearly what we saw starting from 2004 till date, which were incremental in nature. Now it has clearly laid out everything in an integrated fashion. So what it does is, let me just go through and say, first is the objective. Clearly the objective is clearly spelled out, which has been anchored, because objective has been spelled out in the Act. It is just quoting the objective here from the Act. And it says that the administrator shall select implemented through a process of bidding or inviting application. As I told you earlier, bidding was primary, right? Here, the selective invitation of application has been given the same importance as bidding, right? Which is very, very important to understand. Earlier it was bidding was the primary rule, application, non-bidding was an exception. But inviting application has been put at par with bidding, and through a process of nomination, which is specified under sub-rule 2 of the said rule for achieving the objectives under the Bharat Nidhi. So what it does, it empowers the central government with more power to spend money. Earlier it was through process of bidding and invitation of application, or non-bidding through clearly writing why bidding is not required, right? But now there is full flexibility for them to do whatever they want, right? So then what it says that there is one more thing which I should spell out here. The Digital Bharat Nidhi fund shall fund schemes and projects for providing targeted access to telecommunication services for underserved group of society, such as women, person with disability, economically weaker section. Funds shall be released, implemented in such a matter, regular interval, blah, 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 right? So that's all it says. And then it also goes on to say here that if you look at this, the criteria for undertaking scheme under the project for Digital Bharat Nidhi, it says that it should include mobile, broadband services, telecommunication equipment required for delivery of telecommunication services, enhancing telecommunication security and underserved rural and remote and urban area. Everything under the sun is covered now through this act. It also talks about, the other thing that it talks about is to basically to create telecommunication network for provision of telecommunication services in underserved rural remote. So though it talks about, it keeps emphasizing on underserved rural remote, or in rural remote and in urban areas. This is very important, underserved, right? Not in the areas where already telecommunication services exist. And then it also talks about the introduction of next generation telecommunication services in underserved remote and urban areas. Then it says improving access to advanced telecommunication services in underserved remote and urban areas, to improve affordability of telecommunication services in underserved remote and urban areas, to promote innovation, research, development and commercialization of indigenous technology and associated intellectual property right, including creation of regulatory sandbox. Now here in this, there is no underserved word, which means that to promote innovation, research and development, government can go to any extent. It doesn't have to limit itself to underserved remote and urban areas, which has to be a point to be noted. And then the other point to be noted here is the establishment of relevant standard to meet national requirement and their standardization international standard bodies, which is basically to include India's 5G and 6G innovation in standard bodies. A lot of money has to be spent, so they will spend that money through the USO fund. To encourage a startup in telecommunication sector, to create a bridge between academia, research, startup, industry for capacity building and development of telecommunication ecosystem, to create new technology solution, deploy new technology, improving access to telecommunication services. And then it says to promote sustainable green and technologies in telecommunication sector, right? And to establish or fund person promoting telecommunication growth, telecommunication research, development standards, startup, telecommunication manufacturing for Atmanirbhar Bharat. Such criteria may be determined by the administrator as deemed necessary. And then the most important thing here in the last is the process of selection of implementation. As you saw, anything under the sun the USO can fund, which is increasing in flexibility by this fund for the implementation of project and spending by the government. And as I told you earlier, the selection process was by bidding, and non-bidding was an exception. Here it was very clearly laid out. This thing has clearly laid out. The act has the rules have clearly laid out that what kind of process will be followed in for which area of funding. So if you see here, selection of bidding has been clearly established for serial number 1, which says promote and support telecommunication services for promoting access to and delivery of established telecommunication services in underserved rural remote area, including consultancy, assistance and advisory support. So here there is no question, you cannot give it without bidding, you have to give it bidding. And the second here, which can be selection by application, is research and development for new emerging technologies or products and services through but not limited to research projects, pilot projects, co-funding, viability gap funding and risk and capital up to commercialization. So up to commercialization, selection by application. Once it is commercialized, then after that the government will have hands off and they will let it go. So now friends, you probably understand, to summarize this, the USO fund evolved over a period of time since 2004. There were many provisions which did not exist earlier. Earlier, the fund was limited to only the telecom service provider who were contributing to the USO fund. Later, what happened? Many other players also got included who were not contributing significantly to the fund. Even BSNL was funded disproportionately from the fund, though BSNL's proportional contribution to the fund was not that, and some of the funding to BSNL was done without tender. But tender was the rule. Selection process without tender was an exception. There were many provisions which were not part of the fund, like research and development, R&D, startups, etc. They were not part of the fund. Now what they have done, they have included everything under the under this fund. Everything that is possible in the telecom and communication sector has been included under the fund, and the flexibility has been added, but through bidding as well as through selection by application, by clearly spelling out which area of the activity will be through bidding and which area of the activity will be through selection of through application, to the extent up to commercialization. Right? So I think this is the net of the USO story, which is the Digital Bharat Nidhi story, which has been published by many articles in the newspaper. So I thought that to give you a larger picture by doing this video, otherwise you will not understand the implication of the Digital Bharat Nidhi rules. Why these are important? For that, the history has to be understood, and that's why I did this video. I hope that you understood, and thank you for listening to the end, and I'll come back to you next time with a new video. Thank you very much.